Today we're going to be looking at the last two reading passages in practice test 9. So of course there's some interesting questions on the other passages, but I find that both of these passages have a number of challenges in them, and in the interest of time I'm going to cover these two passages in full. So just a couple notes. Remember, have your test open. I want you to have already done these questions at least once before you watch this video, and don't just sit back and let the SAT knowledge wash over you. It doesn't work that way. Actively engage in this work. The other thing I'm going to say is go easy on me because I haven't done these questions in advance. I've done this test a while back, but I haven't looked at these in a while, and I think there's a real benefit to me doing them unrehearsed for you. That is, we'll see how I attack the questions. Of course, I remember some things about them, but I don't have anything memorized that I'm going to say here. So let's jump right in with question 32. All right. We want to know what the main purpose of this passage is. Now, usually you would do this question last in a set, but I will break my own rule for the sake of your chronology. So do this main purpose question at the end. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to go read the key points in the passage. So the introduction is pretty key. It tells me that it's a speech from the Anti-Slavery Convention in 1838. And then I'm just going to read the beginning and end of the first paragraph and take it from there. First paragraph, we are told that it is not within the province of woman to discuss the subject of slavery, that it is a political question, and that we are stepping out of our sphere when we take part in its discussion. It is not true that it is merely a political question. It is likewise a question of just, okay. So she's saying it's not just a political question, it's other stuff, right? End of the paragraph. These considerations are all involved in the question of liberty or slavery. So essentially, she's saying it's not just a political question, it's other stuff, right? That phrase, it's not merely a political question on line 5, probably the most important thing. Next paragraph, and it is a subject comprehending interests of such magnitude. I'm sorry, let's try that again. And is a subject comprehending interests of such magnitude merely a political question? Okay, so she's still asking this question. I'm just going to go to the end of the passage. Sometimes if you read too much information, you'll get lost in these details. So, if you've read the whole passage and you're doing this at the end, then what I would suggest is make sure you go back and read those key spots and not everything. So, last paragraph. But admitting it to be a political question, have we no interest in the welfare of our country? May we not permit a thought to stray beyond the narrow limits of our own family circle and of the present hour? So, what she's saying is, can't we think about political stuff too? So it's not merely a political question, but can't women think about political questions as well as other questions? So she's really argued sort of two things. It's not just political, this idea of abolition, and it's also okay for women to discuss political questions, right? So both of those. Let's get rid of some answers here. I'm looking for something that means roughly what I've already said. So I don't like the idea that we're accusing abolitionists. I don't see that in the key spots of the passage. Answer choice B sounds like really patriotic. I'll hold on to it. Something about the spirit of the American Revolution, but usually those are wrong. Make the case that women's rights are meaningless while slavery exists. It's a nice, strong statement in C, but I don't know if that's the main purpose. I kind of told you what I thought the main purpose is. Encourage women to see their participation in the abolitionist movement as just and important. Women have a place to talk about abolition. It's not just political. And even if it is, we can talk about it. So that's perfect, right? So notice this is like the patriotic answer and the extreme answer. These are two types of answers that you can expect. Extreme in all passages, patriotic in the social studies passages. Comes up quite a bit. So I'm going to keep moving. But notice that what I did is I limited the information that I was considering to the sort of key spots in the passage. Introduction, thesis, conclusion, that kind of stuff. 33. Which statement provides the best description of a technique that Smith uses throughout the passage to advance her main point? Okay, that's a tricky one. It's tricky because it's asking about the whole passage. So throughout the passage. All right, so what I'm doing is, this is a case of, let me write this on the board. This is number 33. Sorry. Number 33. Okay, so there's so many things that you could say that Smith is doing, so many different ways of analyzing the techniques that she's using, that it doesn't make sense to just go back to the passage without some sense of what we're even looking for. So you go through the answer choices. A is rhetorical questions with negative answers. So, should we do this? No. Like, what if we did that? No. Those are rhetorical questions with implicit negative answers. That's what we mean. Okay, well, I know what I'm looking for there. Criticizes her opponents by quoting. So we're looking for, is there questions in A? Is there quotes in B? Is there like a story, a powerful personal anecdote in C? And then D says universal ideas. These ideas are universally held. Okay, well, look, if you go back through the story, or not story, if you go back through the essay, what you won't find is like a personal narrative going on. She's not like, this happened to me, and blah, blah, blah. So that's why that's out. We don't see quotations by, we do see some quotations, but it says throughout the passage. Now, I see a bunch of quotations. But I don't see where. Let's look carefully at that one. Self-contradictory remarks. Okay, so I did see quotations, but self-contradictory. That, I don't know if I see that. These quotes like that just quote political question on line 23. The quote province of woman. That phrase is not self-contradictory necessarily. I mean, maybe it is. Maybe if we feel like everything falls within this area that women can do, which I'm sure most of us believe that. I certainly do. That maybe the province of woman is self-contradictory. That's really getting into the pretty technical analysis. But are these the words of her opponents? Maybe they look like they're probably the words of her opponents. But are they self-contradictory? She's not no, she's saying they're wrong, but it's not like self-evident. For instance, the phrase just quote political question is on line 23 is not self-evidently. So I don't think any of these are self-contradictory. So this part of quotations is good. Self-contradict is wrong. The next thing I would do is look for question marks. And she does use these rhetorical questions. Right? Like the first one would be I guess all the way down on line 26 I see one. And is a subject, so there's a question mark on line 26. The beginning of the sentence is way back at the beginning of the paragraph. And is the subject comprehending interests of such magnitude merely political? No. So that's the implicit negative connotation to the rhetorical question. Is it one, continuing on line 23, and one in which women can take no part without losing something of their modesty and gentleness? The answer to that question is no, right? So she keeps asking, should we really not be allowed to think about this? Of course the answer is no, you should be allowed to think of it. So A is the right answer here. She doesn't say, look, everyone knows this. That's what D would be saying, right? It's a really tricky question, but hopefully I've shown you what's wrong. Like the word self-contradictory is wrong in B. It's not universal in D, and there's no story in C. So it's a very challenging question. I hope I've at least started to help you understand how that one works, right? So I found sort of basic ways of talking about the answer choices as a way to start crossing things off. And then I got closer into the details like self-contradictory in order to cross off an answer like B, where there were quotations, right? So that one wasn't totally wrong, but there was a part that was wrong. And gosh, this is another general question about over the course of the whole passage, right? Number 34 asks, how does she develop her argument? Again, these are all three of these questions we've talked about so far. These are all questions you would do at the end. So I'm doing them first for the sake of chronology. You would do these after you answer specific questions, because you'll know more about the passage, right? So for now, let's jump in. How does Smith develop her argument about slavery as a political question over the course of the passage? So the important thing is to go find where she talks about political question, and then read in and around those areas. She says it quite a bit, but importantly, she says it at the beginning, and she says, we are told that women, this is at the very beginning of the passage, we are told that it's not within the province of women to discuss the subject of slavery, that it is a political question. And then she says, it's not just political, right? It's not just political. It's all these other things, right? She says it's a question on line 6 of justice, humanity, morality, religion. Involves the considerations of immense importance to the welfare and the prosperity of our country. So it's important is what she's saying. It's not just political. And then way over on lines 58, but admitting it to be a political question, can't we, have we no interest in the welfare of our country? Shouldn't we be able to care about what happens to our country? So she says it's not just political, and in the end, but it is partially political. In both ways, it should be acceptable for women to talk about these things. That's what she says, right? So, some of these answers sound generally true, but look, the lines that I just pointed to are at the beginnings and ends of paragraphs. If they ask you a broad general question, you can rely on beginnings and ends of paragraphs. And if you trust that, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and frustration looking at the tiny little details of a hard-to-read old passage from the 1800s. So just reading those lines, she doesn't say it's outdated. She just says it's wrong. It's wrong to say it's just political. It's partially political, but it's also other stuff. So look, B's perfect. It's too narrow. But then she says, even if it is political, women should be able to be involved in politics, which is the second part of answer choice B, demonstrates its relevance to her audience. That's why that's right. So for C, she contends that the designation has become trite. Well, trite means sort of like cliche or so drained of meaning by overuse, right? Or sort of like predictable and therefore not impactful. And then she doesn't say, but so this one's close because then revitalize it. She does revitalize the idea that women can be political in the end of the passage, where it seemed before that she was going away from the idea of the political. But she doesn't say, oh, that's played out. That's trite. That's boring. That's a cliche. No, she says it's just not the entire question. The slavery argument is not just political. So then D describes the meaning the designation has for men and then challenges women to embrace it. No, she doesn't. She describes the meaning of it as a political question as inadequate, though partial and still relevant at the end of the day. Okay, let's keep going. So I just want to say before I move on that 34, that word trite is kind of sticking with me because it's close. It's just like, it's just a little bit too, it's not careful and precise enough with the language. She does say that it's not just political. But that's not the same thing as saying, oh, that's just, boring or something or, played out. So that's kind of close. Pay attention to a precision of language, even if the spirit of the answer feels like it's, partially right. You got to be precise. So the first paragraph, we've already looked pretty carefully at this first paragraph. It's not just a political question, it's all this other stuff. So A is wrong because it's not supporting evidence. It is a conventional viewpoint, merely a political question. Or just a political question, right? So she rejects that claim and elaborates on the reason why. That looks great. She doesn't give us a historical background for it. She tells us people say that slavery is a political question, and it's not, and here's why. She doesn't try to fix that right away. She just says, it's not political, it's all these other things. So she rejects it, it's not political, and elaborates, it's moral, it's all these other things. It has a big deal to do with our country. So that's that one for 35. 36, in the passage, it's possible for women to engage in which activity? So evidence that the first one, thank goodness, We can finally ground our thinking quite easily in real text from the passage. Look, I would expect that this answer is going to be fairly early in the passage. So, it is possible for women to engage in which activity? I mean, maybe it's later, but I'm going to start with the earlier lines. 26 says, may not the ornament of a meek and quiet spirit exist with an upright mind and an enlightened intellect? And must women necessarily be less gentle because her heart is open? So she's saying, can't women keep their sort of the qualities that people call feminine while being open to, you know, how sad the world is? Like, she's showing that there's no contradiction between sort of the classically feminine characteristics that her opponents would point out, meekness and politeness and compassion and all that stuff. Those things, being nice and kind, and those things that her opponents would say are the realm of women. She's saying, look, you can be those things and feel for the enslaved sisters, and stretch your hand forth for their rescue on line 33, right? So those lines say you can be a traditional sort of, you can fulfill a traditional female role. Again, this is the words in 1838 or something, while also being compassionate and caring about slavery. That's exactly what A says for 36. It's not about being politically neutral. It's not about doing anything financial. So C is out. And then D has an interesting sort of, it's kind of close. It's like, because she does talk about war a little bit later, but that's misconstrued. So look, I used chronology here to really help me. And of course, you know, I probably would consider other lines on a question like this if I'm moving at a decent speed. But both A and A should be right here because it really, really matches. Remember, when you do evidence, think about the phrase mapping. To be clear, what I mean by mapping is break things into pieces and then see how they map on. I couldn't even spell the word mapping out. How could you trust me? But anyways, act according to humanitarian principles. That's the beginning of 36. I think that's the end of the evidence, right? Which is, must women necessarily be less gentle because her heart is open to the claims of humanity, or less modest because she feels the degradation of her enslaved? So why would you be less modest or less gentle just because you care about people, is what she's saying, right? So I can map on the phrase humanitarian principles onto that language, and preserving the femininity would be like the lines about gentleness and meekness and all that stuff, right? So I'm mapping parts, taking the answer into pieces, and, you know, seeing what language in the evidence exactly sort of matches that set. Okay, so that was 36, 37. Moving on to 38. 38, now we could use chronology to our advantage. It should be after the last question. And it asks about the U.S. Constitution. It also says, according to Smith. Remember, the frame is important. The frame. So by that I mean the according to part. Not the heart of the question, not the meat of the question, but the frame of the question. It's literally going to say it if it says according to. So go find the U.S. Constitution. It's literally brought up on line 34. And you got to break down the sentence. It's pretty tricky, but look, it says the whole physical power of the North. That means sort of military and, you know, let's just say military strength, but like, you know, physical power is pledged for the suppression. So is pledged is sort of like is bound by duty, right? Is sort of sworn to allegiance for the suppression of domestic insurrections. Suppression, put down or stop. Domestic insurrections. Okay, domestic means within our country, not international. So international affairs, domestic affairs. Domestic means inside our country. Insurrections means sort of an attack against civilized society or an attack against maybe government or yeah, I think that's good to say, like government or civilized society. So what we're saying in that first part is the North is sort of already pledged allegiance to or duty bound or has to stop domestic insurrections, stop any violence or attacks within the country from people inside the country. The second part says, and should the slaves, maddened by oppression, endeavor to shake off the yoke of the taskmaster? In other words, if the slaves are going crazy because they've been, subject to this terrible condition, if they try, that is endeavor, if they try to shake off the yoke of the taskmaster, that is get free. So if the slaves try to become free, the men of the North are bound, so are pledged to make common cause with the tyrant. That is, because we're all one country in 1838, even if people in the North didn't like slavery, they would have to support and defend the Southerners' rights to own the slaves and make common cause with the tyrant. That is, help out the slave owner and put down at the point of bayonet, so use, lethal force, every effort on the part of the slaves to attain his own freedom. So she's saying this system shows that in the Constitution, the North has to defend something that they know is wrong. Right? So that's what those lines are saying. And in number 38, that is going to be, look, A and B sound like, what we sort of naively wish they would do. Sever ties with the slave states, right? Oh, those slave states are bad. Or give shelter to the refugees. Like, those sound like, good things. Remember, I think I talked about the idea of a patriotic answer, or an answer that just sounds like idealistic or something. I'm still looking for the best way to say that. I barely spelled patriotic right. It kind of blew that. But the idea is like these answers that just sound nice and righteous, right? They're usually wrong on the SAT. The North would have to help the slave states fight in the slave rebellion. That's something that no one's picking unless they do the reading, right? And it ends up being the right answer. All the other answers sound more like stock things that you might read in a history book, right? They're assumptions that people are making without reading, right? So according to the passage, that means we have to go find where they talk about the U.S. Constitution, go find those, and then decode what's been said. Okay, so what is the question? Write this down. 39. What is the effect of Smith's use of the word tyrant on 40 and 83? So the problem with A, we'd go back to those lines, of course. In the interest of saving time, let me just say, it's not a specific individual. It's, the general slave owner here, I think. It's not a threat from abroad. Again, this is a domestic situation within our country. It doesn't say that women can't be involved. Sorry, I'm laughing at that answer. It's not criticizing these people that hope to do well. It's, pointing out this group that's really bad. It emphasizes the unjustness of slavery. The tyrant is like, the slave owner, I think, in both cases. Okay, so that was 39. 40 is a vocabulary question. I shouldn't say vocabulary. It's words in context. Context is everything here. I keep saying vocabulary, and one of these days I'm going to stop. Context is everything. So what's your moves? There's like a few things. You're going to first of all, you don't cross off, but you look for primary definitions. Primary definitions are usually lower tier answers. That is, I don't cross it off. I just think it's going to take a lot for me to pick just slumbering meaning. I would think sleeping, right? So, but really none of these words are exactly that. So I don't know. I see drowsy with sleeping. I'd probably downgrade answer choice B. Second move is go back and put in your own word. So your own word in the place of the word slumbering. 52. So you need context for this, right? On line 52. Surely this consideration, what consideration? So should their lives, I think they're we're talking about the consideration of the men having to fight an unjust war is what we're talking about. So 51, surely this consideration of fighting an unjust war is of itself sufficient to arouse the slumbering energies of women, to arouse the unused energies of women. I would say sleeping here. So to awaken the sleeping energies of women, or to get off of the like slumbering metaphor, you could say to the energies that were not being used. So it doesn't have to be your own word. It can be like a terribly clunky phrase like I just used. Not being used. That's dormant. It's not unconscious. It's not like, oh, they're lying around drowsy or they're lazy or lethargic. It's unused, dormant. She's not saying women are lazy. That's why A is out. She's drowsy is like messing with the word slumbering, meaning like sleeping, right? It's a little too primary. I mean, look, I would pick it if it was perfect. I'm not saying primaries are always wrong, primary definitions, but they're less likely to be right. Dormant is perfect. Unconscious, no. Because it's not something that they don't know about. It's something that they're just not using. Okay. So aside from picking your own word, the last step would be to put this word back in and make sure it sounds perfect. So it has to sound perfect if it's going to be used. So we're saying the word is dormant, reading that sentence. Surely this consideration is enough to arouse the dormant energies of women. Yes, the energy is not being used. That reads perfectly. All right, 41 and 42 is an evidence set. So let's see. Remember with evidence, I'm going to go to 42 and I'm going to focus on the evidence and how it matches the original question. If that sounds obvious, I get it. It does sound obvious. But oftentimes we get kind of lost trying to do other stuff. So the lines in 42 have to match the question. Most strongly suggest that slavery affects the United States in what way? So how does slavery affect the United States? And the thing is, it says suggest, right? So about half the evidence questions say infer, imply, indicate, suggest. If I see that language, I know that I'm looking for, what I'm looking for is a relationship like to say, it's not cold in here would imply that it's warm. Like it's literally, that's as far off the page as we can go. We can't assume much with a suggestion. So let's go back to 48 to 50. Now look, also this is the last set. It's probably near the end of the passage. So let's use chronology, right? The other thing to think about on evidence is chronology. On most evidence questions, the order is important. So we should be near the end of the passage. I'm going to look at the last two, 68 to 73, 73 to 77. They go together. They're connected probably. So how does slavery affect the U.S.? Okay, so 68. Shall we silently behold the land which we love with all the heart-warm affection of children rendered a hissing and a reproach throughout the world? Should we sit back and watch while people hate on the U.S.? Or where the U.S. is rendered reproachful, so like, or rendered a reproach, rendered a hissing and a reproach. So that's exactly what she says. What she means is, shall we be the bad guys? This system is getting us in trouble. Line 71. By this system which is already tolling the death bell of her decease among the nations? No. So she says on those lines that the U.S. should be embarrassed by its slavery and we should stop. Right? So look at what answers we have here. I think there's one that matches that exactly. Yeah, it's the international community one, right? A hissing and a reproach. That's a reputation, or lowering the reputation. So I'm mapping that phrase on, again with mapping. A hissing and a reproach goes on to the words lowering the country's reputation. The international community is where she says throughout the world, right? So I used chronology and mapping to really help me there. And I found the right answer without doing any more work. Now, look, I've been doing this work for a long time, so I'm able to see those exact characteristics in the mapping process, as well as I'm confident in the chronology thing, that I'm probably done there, But you could go back and look at other lines, and I'll leave it to you to figure out why those lines are wrong. Certainly, I'm happy to. If you find another set that looks really great, let's talk about it. In fact, let me just look at 73 to 77 since it's also at the end, and then we'll move on. The events of the last 2 years have cast their dark shadows before, overclouding the bright prospects of the future. So the things that have happened are making things worse in our country and shrouding the destinies of our country in more than midnight gloom, and we cannot remain inactive. So she's saying, look, we need to be active, right? That's what those lines say. They don't directly say how it affects the United States. I mean, that could imply that there's been a dark cloud, but so violent conflicts, that's too specific. It's a dark cloud, doesn't directly say violent conflicts in areas of the country. Women aren't saying we're not a part of this country. That's why B is out. And weakening the country's government makes some sense because you're like, you guys are hypocrites, but none of those lines said those things, right? So I won't do the other two sets just in the interest of time. I'm going to move on to the last passage. So, in the past at times I've done the skimming with you, but I'm trying to cut down on that time because, if you've already seen how I do that, then we don't need to do like a full skim. But as I look at this next set, which is a dual passage and a science set, we're looking at number 43. I mean, it does ask what the purpose of the first paragraph is. So I will do the sort of read of the first paragraph. And look, the purpose of a paragraph has to do with its context. So we need to see what's going on in the paragraph below the first paragraph in order to understand its purpose. So the title of the first passage is, "A new antibiotic found in dirt can kill drug-resistant bacteria." Okay, cool. And those lines say, pathogens are acquiring resistance faster than we can introduce new antibiotics. And this is causing a human health crisis, says biochemist Kim Lewis of Northeastern. All right, so let's put those in our own words. I don't know another word for pathogen. Maybe bacteria. The bacteria is able to resist the drugs we give it, or we give ourselves to defend it. The bacteria is able to beat the drugs that we're using to beat it, and it's learning how to beat it fast. And this is causing a big human health problem. So I didn't do a great job of paraphrasing that, but you get it. Now look, the rest of the passage goes on to talk about this. It says Lewis is part of a team. This is on line 5. Lewis is part of a team that recently unveiled a promising new antibiotic, born from a new way to tap the powers of soil microorganisms. And the rest of the passage talks about how they did that. Right? We're talking about this one drug and the process by which you get drugs from dirt. So the closest answer that's wrong for 43, let's see. Okay, so controversy's out. It's not a controversy, it's a fact. A controversy is like something people argue about. So looking at C, identify a problem, yeah, maybe, offer a theory. Look, the passage's findings don't challenge the theory that people, I could see how someone would pick that. Someone would say, well, look, now there's this new drug from soil, and it's, the bacteria can't, beat it or something. But the theory is not challenged that bacteria is becoming drug resistant. We're just trying to act on that problem. So if you look at the difference between A and C, it's really close between these two. I'm cool with the first half of both of them. Present a claim. Identify a problem. But is that claim that bacteria is becoming resistant, or pathogens are becoming resistant to the antibiotics we give them, is that supported and developed throughout the passage? No, that would mean explaining to me how resistance happens. Really what this passage does is say, there's a problem, drug-resistant bacteria is a problem, and we have these new ways of developing antibiotics that might beat this problem. So it may address the problem. I also love the language may help. That's like winning language on an SAT question. because it's broad and vague. All right, I'm going to move on. 44. The author of passage 1 suggests that the advantage of the method Lewis's team used to grow microorganisms is that. So we'd expect, we got to use chronology. The next one's passage 2, so we don't actually know where we're going to go for this information. It could be any of these lines, since they're all after paragraph 1, right? Question 43 was about paragraph 1, so it stands to reason this is after that, but none of these lines are before paragraph 1, so we don't know. Let's look at the lines here, 17 to 21, 28 to 32. I'm focusing on so I'm going to write this out again for our evidence set. I'm focusing on key language in 44's question to attack the evidence in 45. I'm not worrying about the answers to 44 yet. And the key phrase to me is like so we say suggest, and then an advantage of method of Lewis's team. So that's what I'm going to focus on. An advantage of the method. 17 to 21, 28 to 32. Okay, 17 to 21. But only about 1% of these organisms can be grown in a lab. The rest, in staggering numbers, have remained uncultured and of limited use to medical science until now. Okay. Well, we see a quote from Lewis right below this, so I'll read this quote. Instead of trying to figure out the ideal conditions for each and every one of the millions of organisms out there in the environment, we allow them to grow in the lab. Instead of trying to figure out the ideal conditions to allow them to grow in a lab, we simply grow them in their natural environment. So look, that's about their method, right? Look, we're done talking about the method by the time we're on line like 28. I mean, I guess you could say that the next two paragraphs are about the method that they used So sure, okay, let's be charitable. But the reason that answer I think is going to be right is because it tells me the advantage. The word suggest, right, is key, and it says you can only grow 1% of bacteria in a lab. The rest, we can't do in a lab. So I'm kind of confused, as a lot of folks will be, and it's okay to be a little bit confused in a reading passage. You don't need to know everything. I'm kind of confused on how this scientist is not in a lab. I guess I know scientists can work in the field, but I'm kind of confused as to if this person is in the field or what's going on. But either way, the method is don't grow it in a lab, do it the natural way. So look at answers that we can just at least cross off. We're not replicating anything in artificial soil, so A is out. Even if 45A isn't the right answer, we know they're not, we're using not artificial soil. And B is wrong because it says, enables it to take in more nutrients than they would achieve in natural settings. No, it's not better than natural, it's just natural. Natural is the best way, is what we're seeing in lines 17 to 21. So even if that evidence isn't right, those two answers are wrong. We don't know about C. This is an extremely technical sounding answer, which I'm not saying it's always wrong. It's sort of like the primary definition in a vocabulary. It's not always wrong, but it takes a lot for that answer to be right. They're trying to talk over your head in these fancy ways. You don't have to know tons about science to do great in the science passages. Look at answer choice D in terms of this idea of mapping. D out of 44. Make use of soil bacteria that they couldn't use before. That maps onto, but only 1% can be grown in the lab. And we know this new way takes advantage of the other 99%. So it is going to be D and A. Okay. So suggest was the frame of the question. And that allowed me to think about how it said, but only 1% can be grown in the lab. And that suggests that this new method, which isn't about growing it in the lab, is taking advantage of soil bacteria that they couldn't use before. So feel free to ask me more questions about that. I'm going to move on in the interest of time. I want to see if I can get through the rest of this passage in 15 minutes here. So 46. The author of passage 2 would most likely agree with which statement about the development of teixobactin? So, this is an interesting one. All right, well, let's go back and I don't know anything about passage 2. I haven't read it in a long time. I mean, I know some stuff about it from whenever the last time, weeks ago it is that I did test 9, but seems like a general question. They don't ask me about any specific lines. Teixobactin doesn't really get brought up till line 70. It says the first new antibiotic they found in this approach, teixobactin, is less exciting to my mind, though it doesn't look bad. Teixobactin killed gram-positive bacteria. It also killed tuberculosis. Okay, so hold on. Just take that paragraph. It killed gram-positive bacteria. So I don't know about this gram-negative thing about A. I'm not crossing it off, but it just didn't say that yet. Now I'm looking at like B, because is this a conventional method? And this exotic environments thing in C that reminds me of this like soils thing we're talking about. Okay, I'm gonna go back to the opening paragraph. I didn't want to get lost in the weeds. I just saw teixobactin on line 70. So look at the beginning of the passage. Many good antibiotic families come from soil fungi and bacteria, and it has long been suspected that if we could grow more types of bacteria from soil or from exotic environments such as the deep ocean, there's that language, then we might find new natural antibiotics. In a recent study, researchers, that's the people we read about in passage 1, Kim Lewis, found that they could isolate blah blah blah. Once the bacteria reached blah blah blah. Okay, so go to the end of the paragraph. This simple and elegant methodology is their most important finding to my mind. It opens up gateways for cultivating a wealth of potentially antibiotic-producing bacteria that had never been grown before. Okay, so he thinks it's good. I also know that D works. I don't know about these other ones, but it confirms this long-held belief that like if you could go and access all these bacteria, right? So that's many good antibiotic families come from soil fungi, and if we could grow more types of bacteria from soil, then we might find new antibiotics. So that was a long-held belief, right? And it confirms that. So they're messing you with the exact language about exotic environments. So this is like a flashy bait word. Flashy bait. Mixing my metaphors there. Actually, sometimes isn't bait flashy? Don't we do that with like lures? Make them flashy sometimes? Maybe it's not a mixed metaphor. But it's flashy bait. It's like, ooh, look at this exact language from the passage. But it's not true that it's saying, oh, we shouldn't look for new antibiotics in exotic environments. Quite the opposite. It's saying, yeah, maybe we don't have to travel to the rainforest to do this, but we should like sort of maybe create these exotic environments. I don't know what Kim Lewis is doing. And that's the point. I don't have to know exactly what's happening to be able to point out what's wrong with answer choices. Now, this is a situation where D is clearly true from that part of the passage, so I don't have to prove C wrong. C is very specific, and it's also saying it's not practical to do the kind of thing that Kim Lewis is maybe doing. But it certainly confirms a long-held belief. The key to me is understanding what wrong answers oftentimes do. It's always probabilistic. You never know for sure. But that's what exotic is doing in this case, is attempting answer from exact language. 47. So if I remember a question, it means it's kind of hard. I remember this one. What does caveats mean? So we've talked about the words in context. Almost completely caught myself that time. Words in context, not vocabulary. What are caveats? Caveats are exceptions. Gosh, I bet I'm going to get this one wrong. So I'm downgrading answer choice A because it's going to take a lot for me to say it's the exact word that caveats mean. But some people don't even know what caveats mean, so maybe that's to your advantage in this case. let's go back and find our own language put into place. So what are my caveats? I don't know yet what that is because we haven't read enough context. Well, I see three. So three what? It was three. It says tioxobactin is not a potential panacea. That means doesn't it doesn't fix everything. Secondly, scaling will be a challenge. And thirdly, it's early days yet. So in other words, these are problems, or I think maybe restrictions make sense. It's not exceptions, because these things he's mentioned are not exceptions to why tioxobactin is good. They're limitations on why tioxobactin is good. Misgivings means you don't trust it. That's not wrong. It's not an explanation. I'm pretty sure it's restrictions. Because, look, the context told me that the restrictions are this is the paragraph. The paragraph above, he's like, tioxobactin's pretty good. And then what are my limitations? Well, it's going to be hard to scale it. It's early days yet, and it doesn't kill gram something. Positive, negative, something like that. All right, so I'm pretty confident in that one that time because I used context to my advantage. And I think that was probably my mistake when I looked at that question previously, is not reading after the word caveats. Okay. So this number 48 is a use question. It asks what's the function of this language 5 years and euro 5 million euros. Okay, what's the purpose? Whenever we do purpose of question or function questions for specific lines, it's above and below. So above and below. This is the last sentence. That's going to take 5 years and 5 million euro. And while these are numbers we must find ways to reduce, while not compromising safety, if we're going to keep ahead of bacteria and evolve far more swiftly and cheaply. So it's telling us that that's too much money and too much time. These are numbers we're going to have to reduce, it says. So is it tioxobactin specifically? I don't know about A. I'm going to move on from A. B says, criticize the level of funding? No, it's like we need to spend less money and still get this done. Underscore the amount of time and money that has already been spent researching, maybe. Compare the amount of money spent developing tioxobactin with the amount. I don't think we're comparing two things, so I'll cross off D. Now, this is tricky because I don't love either one of the remaining answers. Emphasize the scale of effort needed to make it available. Is that true? I mean, I didn't read above. So I guess the third misgiving is its early days. As with any antibiotic, tioxobactin now faces the long haul of clinical trials. Phase 1 to see what you can safely give the patient. 2 to see if it cures infections. 3 to compare its efficacy to the standard care. That's going to take. So this is how much money and time it's going to take to get tioxobactin safe. So yeah, the context above helped me see that it's A. This isn't the amount of time already spent, it's what it's going to take to do the phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. So context above and below is the key for function questions. I used the context below to start, and then the thing that saved me from getting the wrong answer at the end of the day was context below. Okay, let's see if I can race through the rest of these here. 49, the relationship between the two passages. First one's like, how do they develop tioxobactin? Second one's like, they developed tioxobactin, and it's good, but it's not enough, and we have to do more. So look, it's not a dismissive stance, so D is out. Concrete example, they're both talking about the same example. So C is out. A modification of the methodology? No, he says the methodology is great. Offers an evaluation of the significance of the research in passage 1. That was pretty much exactly what I said in my own words, right? Okay, so 50. Both passages make the point that tioxobactin could be useful in... So I think the right answer here is D. Let's see. Standardizing the future development of antibiotics. I don't know if it's a standardization, but maybe I'll hold on to that because it is definitely like a new way. Combating infections that are no longer responding to treatments with other antibiotics. Ooh. So both passages make the point. Controlling the spread of... Like, C is too technical. Probably. Like, I won't cross it off, but I'm like, I don't really like that one. Shaping a new method. So this is method, or this is actually treatment. Or standardizing. Okay, so let's find like shaping a new method of studying the effectiveness of antibiotics. The first passage totally does that. It's like there's this promising new antibiotic, and we have this new method of doing so. The second guide says that he likes the method too. I'm interested in this treatment answer before I move on, though. Combating infections that are no longer responding to treatment with other antibiotics. Um, okay, in immunity, line 9 and 10, even those that have developed an immunity to drugs. So that we definitely say the treatment thing in passage 1. In passage 2, um, I see the methodology thing on line 64. Um, but okay, so I don't know about this resistance. So like I'm seeing in the second paragraph of passage 2, um, it I don't know if it says it was successful in curing stuff that was resistant. It says it was also difficult to select resistance. So I'm leaning towards methodology. I'm not going to give in too quick, even though I only have a couple minutes left here. So I want to finish this out strong. Let me look carefully at the other language other than method and treatment. The effectiveness of antibiotics, no. It's not a method of shaping the effectiveness of the antibiotics. It's a method of developing the antibiotics. I really don't like this stupid C. It's way too technical. Um, it's not laboratory environments. All right, so it is B. I don't even know where exactly. I mean, it did say it was. I'll find it in passage 2. Let's see. Hmm. Well, look, it killed gram-positive bacteria in the laboratory and it cured experimental infection in mice. Oh, and it says it also killed the tuberculosis. Here's the key lines. It killed the tuberculosis bacterium, which is important because there's a real problem with resistant tuberculosis in the developing world. Okay, so I think it's B. I mean, I feel much more strongly that the other answers are wrong than that B is great, and that's kind of maybe a lesson in and of itself. So B for 50. 51 and 52 is an evidence set. We can do this. We can do this. And let's see. So we're looking for evidence for the question. Information in passage 2 supports which conclusion about the mice in experiment described in passage 1? Well, the mice, like, we were just there. Let's go to the later lines in 52 where they talk about the mice. Where are those? Maybe those middle sets, 64, 68, 69 to 72. Is that right? No. The mice don't get brought up until the 70s. So I'm going to look at 80 to 82. Well, that might be too late. It doesn't kill Grim. I don't see any mention of the mice there. Okay, so let me be careful. Um, about the mice. That supports the conclusion about the mice in experiment. Okay, so let's go to passage 1 then and find where they describe this mice business. I think that's down on line at the bottom of the page. Mice infected. Tioxobactin emerged as the most promising drug. Mice infected with bacteria that cause upper respiratory tract infections were treated with tioxobactin, and the drug knocked out the infections with no noticeable toxic effects. It's likely that tioxobactin is effective because of the way it targets disease. It breaks down bacterial cell walls, okay, by attacking blah blah blah. Okay, so I've now got some ammo to go look at other lines. Look at 80 to 82. Didn't it mention something about cell walls? It doesn't kill gram-negative opportunists as it is too big to scale their complex cell wall. So let's compare those two lines. The drug breaks down bacterial cell walls on line 45, 46 by attacking the lipid molecules. And then it doesn't kill gram-negative on line 81 because it's too big to scale across their cell walls. So their cell walls. So um, the upper respiratory, yeah, look, it's going to be C for 51 and D for 52. the upper respiratory tract infections they were treated weren't caused by gram-negative because tioxobactin doesn't cure gram-negative, right? So that's the relationship we were looking for. I kind of had a bias towards the stuff at the end in this evidence set, and it ended up working out well, right? So in this case, it was fairly technical, but it was this relationship of this word cell wall and going and finding that again. Okay, challenging stuff. If I breezed too quickly through any question that you have, please let me know. I don't like to make these videos much longer than this because I'm trying to keep people from going too deep into the video watching world. Hopefully that helped you on a few questions you got wrong, and hopefully you learned a thing or two. Let's talk about anything that remains confusing. I'm happy to break things down in greater detail for you, either in a meeting or in an email or a comment on a video. Whatever works for you, feel free to reach out and I'll be happy to help. Until I hear from you, or until next time, happy studying. Take care.